Hello everyone, my name is Burgess Owens, Congressman from Utah, and very proud to say I was raised by a World War II vet. I grew up in the Deep South in the 1960s, and there was a time when our dads had just come back from World War II. They were very proud of what they had done. They were proud of our country. They believed in something called meritocracy. And there also was a time when, because we were fighting the same fight against evil, it didn't matter what color we were, background, religion. It was a time we started to break down the barriers that had been for so long going in our country. And my dad kind of helped explain how it worked out. It was one of those conversations we had at the very end of his life. I think he was like 84, 85 years old at the time. Having these conversations, I was just so sorry we hadn't started it much earlier. Because he told me about as a young man coming out of college, he was recruited to become part of this remarkable, kind of a unique group. They were in reconnaissance. He went to college at Purdue University, and he was recruited to join this group that was one of the first integrated groups of young men across the country. And he came together in Alabama. And again, this is one of my first conversations with Dad, and he said it was interesting, Burgess, because what happened, whoever was overseeing this made sure that every team of two, had a white and a black soldier. So for the first time in his life, he had a chance to experience what it was to work with someone, to service someone during that time that was not of his color. And he says, Burgess, what I learned from that is I could not become a racist. So whoever he was teamed up with, thank goodness, was a pretty good guy. They were actually, after that experience in Alabama, they were divided again. He ended up going to the Philippines, where he served with a all-black unit. Then the very last part of his term, of his service, he was actually in Tokyo after the bomb had been released. So I will say this, though. I was dishonored. That generation was a remarkable generation because they understood what it was that they were fighting for the good of our country. They volunteered by the millions. It was something that, matter of fact, if you could not get there, they felt they were letting the country down. And because of that, they came back very, very proud of who they were, very, very accomplished because what they had done, and built the greatest middle class in our country's history. They came back building up their families, their businesses, their communities, ended up doing the 60s, breaking down the walls of segregation, because they saw firsthand what it was to fight for what was right and what our country was stood for. So I'm just very pleased and just proud, to be honest with you, to have been raised during that period with a dad who truly represented what that generation was all about. And that's why we have to, all of us, lean back and find out who represented us and who represented you during this time. I think the greatest thing we can do is learn our history. And you find out that though we were not perfect, we never have been, never will be, because we are not perfect either. We've had a generation who believed in our country and the values. They were willing to fight for it. And because of it, we have the freedom today and the flexibility today that we have. So we're standing on some very tall shoulders. And it's important that we know who they are and what they did. And many of them, like my dad, never talked about it. Again, I was fortunate that we had some time at the very end of his life. I would pull out my recorder and we'd talk a lot during that time. But for so many years, he was building his family, his dreams, his businesses, and I was doing the same. We just never had that time to sit down and do it. So I'm going to suggest all of those who listen to this conversation, take the time out. It's so well worth the investment. History is something that we have to lean back on. With it, we find so much pride in who we are, appreciation for who we are, and also kind of what we can accomplish as a vision of what we can accomplish in the future. So, but it comes down to knowing our history. So take the time to do it now, because once it's gone, like I said, I wish I had so many more of these conversations with my dad, and unfortunately I can't do it anymore. So please take the time out to make that happen. So with that being said, we're going to have a lot more on this conversation. It's something I feel very, very excited to discuss with you. Again, because of the remarkable generation that came before us. So I'm going to invite Monica to kind of give us a little background of what she's doing, and we can talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you so much. As the director of the Veterans History Project, it's also my honor to sit with you to hear about your dad's service and the ways that you're lifting his experience so that other people can understand about that important history. That's exactly what we do here at the Veterans History Project. we work with individuals, like in your district, to provide them the information they need to sit down with a seriousness of purpose, to find that time you're talking about, to ask the questions, to interview the veteran in their lives, in their communities, and make it part of this rich archive here at the Library of Congress.
The Veterans History Project. Monica, would you mind telling us a little bit more about what that is?
Oh, I'd love to. The Veterans History Project is the nation's way of connecting to the library through telling the stories of the veterans in their lives and communities, one person at a time. It can be oral history, it can be personal narratives that are letters, documents, photographs, memoirs, journals. We currently have over 114,000 individual collections of veterans who served in uniform from World War I through the more recent conflicts here at the Library of Congress.
Well, I'll say this, as you're talking, I was just thinking why history is so important, particularly American history. And that's why we have to fight to hold on to it, to make sure it passed down. Within our history, we were first of all knowing where we started. We started with a very courageous group of people who came here looking for a way to make sure their next generation was going to grow, the Pilgrims. Very courageous group. They were not guaranteed once they got on that boat they were going to land here, but they did. And I think that's in essence what our country has always been. It's about young people, men and women, don't know what the next step is, but they have the courage to step out there anyway. And I think about the generation, my dad's generation, that is now, we're losing them. But I think about at 18, 19 years old, now that I have been 18 and 19, I realized it wasn't because they lacked fear. They were afraid, like we all are, to take those steps and to rush those beaches, those things they had to do. But they had the faith that some kind of way they're going to make it through it. And many of them didn't. But because of that courage that they saw, they were able to come back and build a better society for us all. So that's really the storyline of how do we get to where I can sit here in Congress now. I can sit here and not think anything of it. It's just, to me, natural. I can support an entire district in Utah in which my race is a minority. But it doesn't matter, because it's really not about our race. It's about what we feel and our content of character. And that's really what has been the goal and the fight for generations before us to get to this point. And it took veterans. It took those who didn't quite understand the longest part of this, but just knew that the next step would get them to becoming a more perfect union. And so we have to really look back and appreciate every single one of the generations of men and women who decided to fight for our country, fight for our American way. And knowing that it took a lot of courage, and it wasn't the absence of fear. It's just the presence of more faith, and so we owe them a lot of gratitude because of that.
And the project is a great opportunity to share that gratitude at depth. We collect those first-person remembrances, that first-person experience of United States men and women of service who served, just as you're talking about, from that historical perspective, but on the personal scale, from World War I through the more recent conflicts and even peacekeeping missions. And in that, you can discover on that one-to-one basis with the veteran in your life that matters to you, the veteran in your community, what their experience was. Was it one where when they came back, they took advantage of the GI Bill and that propelled them into something else, that propelled their family into something else? Or maybe they had a different experience. And to your point, it is the cacophony of all of these experiences that help us all together understand our collective history, what it's like to be in that moment of conflict or what it's like to support. So we want the story of everyone who served for the U.S. in uniform from World War I through the more recent conflicts, whether they were in combat right on the front lines of that battlefield or whether they were serving in instrumental support capacities that are sort of behind the scenes. And you're absolutely right, coming up this year on the 75th anniversary of the desegregation of the armed services, it's a really perfect time to be delving into these themes and understanding each other better through these experiences.
I think the greatest gift we can give our children is the history of our past. Those who came before us who just normal people, and that's what we realize as we get older. We're just normal folks, making little decisions along the way, and those decisions have major consequences if we can look back in time to see that. A little bit more about my dad, and again, a lot of this happens to be because he was part of this society at that time, where young men were really taught that even though you saw fear, you ran toward it. That's what you do. They were taught when you come back, you take care of your family. You provide for them. You protect them. You commit to your family. Those kind of things that they were taught. And the society did a remarkable job of that. One of the things that I learned again during this last phase of talking with my dad, he finished up at Purdue College. And from there, he again got into reconnaissance, ended up going to war, came back. And this is something I didn't find out until he had passed. I ran across a box of letters. And again, the power of history. Ran across a box of letters that he had gotten from his mom. Well, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, I know this box of letters was actually that he had kept and his brother because they wanted to go into graduate school after they finished college. But in the South, they had Jim Crow laws in which blacks could not go but so far. You go to a black college and that was the end of it. And they expected to go back to the fields or do something else. This box of rejection letters that he never told me about, we never talked about, never pulled it out and said, Burgess, this is what they did to me during that time. What that generation had was this attitude, you tell me I can, I'm going to show you how I can. So they were very tenacious and very persistent. That was the entire generation, not just blacks, but the Jewish. I mean, that society, that generation of men at that time. And so he kept it up and ended up going to Ohio State. He got his PhD at Ohio State through the GI Bill. His brother, he got his in agronomy, the soil science. His older brother, got his PhD at Ohio State in economics. They both went on to teach college for 40 years. Dad at Florida A&M, my uncle at University of Houston. They were both very successful businessmen, had owned property. And more importantly, toward the end of their lives, they were very much into giving back. They were both mentors to kids, particularly at-risk kids. That's kind of what their niche was. The thing that I learned, though, from that process is that that generation, and I would say the generation of men, women, and soldiers all the way back, in most cases, they were underdogs. You think about our history of what's going to war. It wasn't that we were guaranteed we were going to go in there and win the battle, win the war. Most times we went in just with this esprit de corps, this pride in who we were. And that actually not only does it happen as you're going through the process, but it carries on once you come out. So that's why when they came out, they were so successful as a community. Because soldiers, they develop this bond. It's kind of hard to describe. The closest thing I've come to it is playing NFL. I played football for 10 years, and there's a bond you kind of develop with players who go through the same struggle, the same price, and the same victories. It's something you kind of go through. And that's what that generation of World War II soldiers came out. Because I know even toward the end of his life, Dad was always trying to find a way to support other veterans. And I will say this, all veterans didn't have the success my dad did, but they all had struggles, they all had overcoming, they all had some benefit. If you look back and see how you got to where you are today, something came out of that experience that veteran had. Something, again, it might not have been a very positive experience, but still out of that can come lessons that we can all learn. And I think that the biggest thing we can do as a society is tied to this empathy. We understand what our veterans have gone through, understand that what they put on the line for us. We not only want to know their story, but it gives us an idea what service truly means. And so we learn so much more by going through that process. And I would encourage everyone. I've learned, I would say the last 15, 20, 25 years, I've gotten into really wanting to know more about my history. So I've been very, very proactive in finding out. That's why I sat down with Dad and finally taped some stuff. Found out it goes all the way back to my dad's dad, to a grandfather who was a World War I vet at 16 years old, he volunteered to go into World War I. Very successful farmer later on. But those are the kind of stories you learn just by going back, and it just elevates your respect for them. And in my case, I was able to go back and see a signature where my grandfather had signed on to become a soldier. So, and it was back in, I think, 1914, somewhere in that range. So it's kind of nice to see that and see the decisions they made along the way and how those decisions have impacted us.
It's wonderful that you're able to connect your family history to our larger collective history, and that you had that opportunity with your father. You didn't, it sounds like, have that opportunity with your grandfather to hear his service. But one of the things that's so rich about the over 114,000 individual collections that individuals around the country and many in Utah have already contributed to the Library of Congress is that we offer over 70% of our materials are on the website, and all of the collections are served here in the American Folklife Center Reading Room. And through those, you can find the experiences of individuals, women and men, who served maybe at the same time, maybe in the same place, maybe doing the same job or rate as someone who's your loved one. So if you didn't have that opportunity to sit down with them and ask them the questions to be part of the Veterans History Project, you could at least get a sense of some of the themes you're talking about, from conflict to conflict, of camaraderie, of understanding our place in service, of understanding how we connect to the larger history. And so I would encourage you to look amongst your own possessions for any letters or photographs or things you might have from your grandfather. Is that a possibility?
You know what's interesting, and Monica, you nailed it. I think within all of us, we have this question mark of, where did I come from? How did I get to where I am? What was my history about? And in that history, can I find something I can find some pride in? I think we all have that search. And I would say that every one of us has someone back in our history we can lean on and say, I'm so proud of what that person did. We have to take the effort to get there, to study and find out who they are. But particularly when it comes down to those who served our country. You're right, I ran across just about 3 years ago, a letter that my dad received from a person he had met in Tokyo. And they were just kind of communicating. Of course, it's not like today where you text, you can keep in touch. Once he left, they never connected again. But it was just nice to read that kind of information and know a little bit about my dad when he was in his 20s. It is amazing. And for those who've never really tapped into this experience, there's nothing like knowing your history. Nothing like knowing somebody that you know and finding what their history is because they're linked to you in some way. And it's also for the person who has experienced it, it feels special to finally share with someone those moments, those times, good and bad, because we all have things we want people to know that they care about, and to be honest with you, when veterans know 50, 60, 70 years after the experience what they did, that somebody cared about what they did, it just gives them a really good feeling that it was all worth it. And I would say, particularly now, our older veterans, where they're losing their friends and their family, and time marches on, and we have so few of them now from World War II, particularly, that now would be the time to capture those magic moments and to not only record it but to share with the rest of our country. Our country thrives and grows based on our collective history. It's based on not just what your parents and not my parents did, but what we did as a society at that time. And it gives a message. When we talk about my dad's generation being the greatest generation, it's because we saw what they did collectively. And those stories that we all share and we talk about is the saved here gives us this DNA of what they stood for, why they stood the way they did, and what they did when they came back, when they finished up. And with that being said, it's one of those things that we can strive to live up to if we truly understand what they did. So,
it's interesting that you touch on DNA, because we often talk here about it's a little bit of shame that we don't send letters anymore, because if you have the privilege of having that correspondence, those original photographs, letters, diaries from the loved one in your family, you know, chosen or otherwise, who served, that touching it and reading it and having that experience is a little bit like touching the DNA, and there's an experience that happens there that's very personal. The great thing about putting those collections, those originals here at the Library of Congress, is then the benefit is widened to use. Yes. And this ongoing cycle that you're talking about of one generation really informing and shaping the next generation becomes so obvious once you see the collections. I had the great fortune to be this weekend down at the last commemoration for the 50th commemoration of the Vietnam War. And in that, so many generals and secretaries, you know, of the Navy and things like that talked about how important their service during the Persian Gulf War was, because it was informed by the Vietnam generation. And those Vietnam generation individuals talked about how the World War II and Korea generation really informed not just their service, but to your point, what it was like to come home. Yes. And now we collectively are looking at that experience of the welcome home for the greatest generation, and then each successive conflict, and learning how to handle that better. And you can see that pattern in the collections here.
And I think I can't say enough about how important it is for collectively for us to do this, because history has to be trained from truth. History has to be taught from truth, the good, bad, and ugly. And only when we have that collective from different eyes and voices and across the board, across the spectrum, can we truly find out what that history was all about. We should never have it where it's being dictated or defined by a single source, because a single source could be biased. But when you have a collective like we're talking about, you all of a sudden get a chance to see just the mosaic that really makes our history what it is. And it's a beautiful mosaic, it really is. It's just what I think we have to recognize, I think more so when you look at the service part of it, because you go back even to the Revolutionary War. There are many black Americans who have no idea that the first person who died in that effort was a black man. He was respected. The fact that we now can point to him means that those around him looked at him as a leader and respected him, so he was not lost in history. So I say it's a lot about that particular era, that time, and all the soldiers that fought in that time, black, white, Indian. There was a bunch of different people that had the same goal, which was freedom, was this concept of freedom. That if we don't pass that down, our young people today will never know what they fought and died for. So it is really upon us, each and every one of us. I mean, it might sound like a very hard lift to do, but once you start doing it, it becomes so easy, because you're talking with someone that you love, someone you know. You get this history that you now know will be part of American history. It'll be shared with the rest of our country, and that history, like I've done with my kids, my grandkids love it. When I found another picture that I can pass to them, say, this is your great-grandmom, this is your mom, or whatever that might be that they might not have met, but they now get a chance to know them. And that helps their personality grow a little bit, to be tied into somebody successful like that, or somebody that tried through tough times to make it through.
And when you connect individuals that are important to you and to your family, then to a date or a conflict or a time period that we all learn about, connecting that first-person story, whether it's, as you're talking about, the important and valuable multiplicity of voices through oral history, or these first-person narratives, when we have the opportunity to get that 360 perspective on a historical moment, and then individuals can connect that historical moment to the person and their family, it opens up possibilities for understanding not just what we've been through together, but maybe towards having a shared vision for where we're going from there. Absolutely.
We would love for you to help our veterans tell their story so that we can share with the rest of our country. Please feel free to contact me in my office or the Library of Congress. It is a remarkable opportunity for us all to share our history together and to grow together. And so whatever you can do to help out for veterans, please, if you have somebody that's a veteran in your household, please take the time to help record them and get that information to us. For those who are not veterans or part of that circle, reach out again to my office or the Library of Congress, and we'll make sure we can tie you into how to make that happen.